Welcome to Landwards, the podcast for the land-based engineering community, brought to you by the Institution of Agricultural Engineers.
Hello and welcome to the Landwards podcast. I'm your host, Andy Newbold, and I am very, very kindly and honoured to be joined by Professor Dick Godwin. Hello, Dick.
Good afternoon, Andy. How are you doing?
I'm great, thank you very much. Thank you again for joining us today. I feel, given that your name probably first appeared in my life referring to some reference documents on an undergraduate soil engaging implement project I was doing at Harper Adams probably in 1989 or 90, and then getting to know you for the last several decades through our respective Institution of Ag Engineers life. It's a real pleasure to be able to spend some time with you today and find out a bit more about the man and the profession of Professor Dick Godwin. So shall we start in the beginning? How did you get into all of this, Dick?
That's a long story. It's a long time ago. I guess I started off by being raised on at the entrance to a farm, living in a tide cottage in South Oxfordshire. And I lived there until I was about 5. We had a good farm manager there who would take me to the field on the back of a horse. And at that time, I could see that transition, subconsciously, I'm sure, from animal power into tractorization, with Fordson and Minneapolis Molines and things of that nature coming onto the farm, especially for the autumn thrashing operation. Whether it was thrashing or whether it was rat bashing, I'm not sure, because there were as many rats came out of the ricks as there were sheaves of corn. But it was an interesting period. And during that time, up until the age of 5, my father built me, as Christmas presents, tractors and balers and trailers and a whole model farm. From that point on,
he sowed the seed.
The seed was sowed. There was no going back. If he ever wondered when I was going to get a proper job, he's got it to blame for doing that. I went on to the local primary school and successfully managed to fail the 11+ exam, which was probably the best thing I ever did, because it enabled me a couple of years later to take an entrance exam to a technical stream of a school in Reading, Alfred Sutton's. That technical stream focused on engineering, and which gave me a bit of a challenge to start with, because I had to tackle subjects like algebra, calculus, and physics, which I had never done before. But I did master those after a while, and alongside the practical skills in metalwork and engineering drawing, which I loved, I managed to get sufficient O-levels and A-levels to go on to do higher studies. Interesting thing is, during this period, the manager of Nettlebed Estate recruited me in my holidays to work on the estate farms, whether it be cattle drives or silage making, grain drying, manure handling. All of these things I did with great enjoyment in my early and mid-teens. The interesting thing was it switched me into thinking of agriculture when I was actually doing a school program in engineering, and it was how do you bless these two things? It worked out okay in the end, because whilst I would have wanted to have gone on and done a degree in agriculture, maths and physics and engineering design were not the entry requirements for a degree in agriculture.
I guess you felt at that point that the choices you had made closed that door for you.
They certainly had, but thankfully, the National College of Agricultural Engineering was just coming on to the higher education offerings, and we had a brilliant careers master at Alfred Sutton's. We used to refer to as Killer Allen. He was in chemistry, but he was my form master in the 5th year, and he knew my dilemma. And when it landed on his desk, the prospectus for the National College of Agricultural Engineering, he said, "I think this is what you're looking for." I took it home, I read it, I would read the prospectus in bed. I probably knew the prospectus better than Peter Payne did, who was the principal at the time. And I applied to the National College to do their associateship of the National College of Agricultural Engineering, which was a degree level course, but didn't have the stamp of BSc in the time.
And what sort of time was this? Just give me a timeline. When was this? Give me some
We're
dates.
talking 1965 to 68.
Okay. And then carrying on from that, where did that lead you to?
Well, that then led me through to going to the United States, to the University of Illinois. I was fortunate in as much as one of our students at Silso the year before had gone to Illinois. I wrote to him and said, "What's it like studying in the States?" He said it's fine. But before I got a letter back from him, the head of department sent me an offer letter saying you can come and study here, and I will allow you to have a teaching and research assistantship, which will pay your tuition
Oh,
fee.
okay.
And so it was a breakthrough. I could have never afforded to have paid for a US university degree program if it without that.
And how old were you at this point? 21? Something like
21.
that?
21.
So quite exciting as a 21-year-old in 1968
Yes.
to get in a Dakota or whatever you flew in at that point to maybe not that old, but quite exciting to go to the States at that point.
Yes, it was. I think it was a 707. But the most exciting part of that was to land in Chicago in the middle of the Democratic Convention riots.
Oh,
Where the bus driver that took me from O'Hare Airport down to the Chicago Loop, which was where the train, or you could catch the train down to Champaign-Urbana.
yeah.
He said, "I'm going to turn off the Michigan Boulevard in a moment. I'll stop briefly, jump out, grab your bag, and go like bloody hell down to the next through 3 or 4 blocks, and there you'll find the railway station." So he navigated me through the Chicago riots.
Fair enough. And as you said at the time, you probably just looked out of the window with your eyes wide, thinking, "What have I got myself into?"
Especially when this bus driver was beginning to stand up from the driver's seat when he could see somebody being bundled into the back of a paddy wagon, and he thought he was going to go and help him. But as he looked out of the window, a state trooper came up with a baton in his hand, tapping the baton against his other hand to say, "You stay where you are, buddy."
Yeah. Keep driving the bus.
Keep driving the bus, exactly.
So tell us a little bit more about your Illinois, your University of Illinois experience then.
It was a good experience. I mean, why I thought I wanted to go to the States was I wanted to get hold of a different culture's opinion on agricultural engineering. And the American universities were obviously much older than the National College of Agricultural Engineering in terms of teaching ag engineering. And much of the National College's curriculum and format was based on studies that the academics at Silso had done of US university courses. And so it fitted pretty well. And I chose to do the soil and water option, which enabled me to do a research project in irrigation and to take a number of good courses in basic research skills in instrumentation and statistics, as well as the soil and water programs.
And at that point when you were developing your ambition sort of around teaching and research, what other key lessons did you learn?
I think probably the key lesson from that was both from the research aspects of the coursework and the research project. I'd been asked to stay on for a little longer to help their teaching, and that got me standing up in front of university first and second year students in teaching drainage and irrigation, and I loved that as well. And so I had the research and the teaching coming together, and I then decided, well, if you're going to make a career out of it, all the advice at the time was you've got to have a PhD to pass 6 and get onto the snakes or the ladder, whichever it is, and move forward. The other lesson I learned at that time, and it was a very good lesson, was the American maxim of publish or perish. If you want to get on in the university world, you had to put those papers under your belt and be seen to be publishing high quality research. That probably was the same in the UK to a certain extent, but not in all academic establishments. There was still scope for the non-research driven people to do excellent teaching, and many did.
Just doubling back slightly to your comments about teaching, I've always found it to be particularly stimulating to stand up in front of a group of people where you've got inquiring minds, and just the process, irrespective of who's delivering and who's receiving the training, that process always fascinates me, and I always enjoy it. So it made me smile when you effectively said the same thing there. I think it's a very powerful thing, is to be in a room with other people, like-minded or otherwise, where you're inquiring and seeking the truth and finding things out.
Certainly is, and I think the benefit of doing it at the level that I was fortunate enough to do it was that most people in that classroom, whether they be 18 or 19-year-old undergraduates or 25-year-old graduate students, they wanted to be there. It wasn't a question of having to keep the control of the class. It was a question of feeding them the material that they needed in order to be able to succeed in their own careers.
And at this stage, presumably, you found yourself teaching people who were older than you as well.
I think I did a few. I mean, I think that teaching there were probably about 40 in the class, and they would have ranged from maybe 19, 20 up to 23, 24.
Yeah.
Many of the undergraduates were still older than me
Mm.
As a graduate student, because of the difference in the length of the courses in the States and the UK.
And you were effectively teaching your peers in that regard.
Exactly.
In terms of the level, so that presumably came to its natural conclusion a couple of years after starting in Illinois. Where did that lead you?
Where did that leave me? It left me on a little bit of a dilemma to start with, in as much as I recognise, as I said a few moments ago, that I probably needed to have a PhD in order to shake six. Now, did I stay in the States and do the PhD, or did I come back to the UK? And I had a strong desire to help British agriculture, and that and family commitments. I think I needed to go home, needed to come back. Now, there weren't that many places to come back to, but Silso was an obvious one. I remember coming back the second Christmas, and I called in at the National College to be told that they had a scholarship going from Calagas to look at improvements into anhydrous ammonia injection equipment. And I said, should I apply for that? And they said, I think you should, Dick, and nod and a wink.
Yeah,
and
shove in the middle of the back.
Yeah, we desperately need somebody to do this. We can't find anybody daft enough otherwise. And so I came back in the middle of 1970 to start that program back at the National College, which was very good because it enabled me to get into some of the tillage engineering that I wanted to do, which complemented the broader soil and water aspects from Illinois. And I was fortunate enough then to work with Gordon Spawn, John Kilgour, and Peter Payne, who were good mentors in what I was trying to achieve.
And did you pick up any awards for the work you did on the injector as well?
It was a sort of remembrance I had a few weeks back when putting this together. I think that Calagas at that time did win a silver medal award from the RASE for the improved injectors, because these were injectors to squirt anhydrous ammonia into grassland. Before, they almost used chisel tines with a tube on the back, and it just ripped everything to hell.
Everything came straight out again
in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
This, I think, we lost. You could smell ammonia in the field if we'd been injecting with it, but 1 or 2% of an ammonia leak from the field was, almost made the whole field smell of ammonia. And so it worked remarkably well, and cut the right sort of slots in the soil, quite shallow in their making, and could be pressed down, and it worked pretty well.
I find it a little bit ironic that we're in early 2025 talking about mitigating ammonia emissions on applications in grassland, which is something dairy farmers still struggle with today, mainly because the techniques are available, no one chooses to use them. If you think about splash plate slurry application, for instance, this is not today. the state of the art was something which has been kicking around for 50 plus years, from what you're saying.
It certainly is, because what happened was, as soon as just after I had done my PhD work, I was then employed to do work at Silso for a project on improving the subsoils because of the bad damage that was done to soils in 1968 that was reported in the Strutt report. But having done that, the Canadians asked if I would go across and help them with the slurry injection project. Virtually almost the same, but at a scale larger, because we were talking about many tons of animal manure per hectare, and that required the design of a winged injector, which could work much shallower than the slot cutters. So therefore, the draft was much less. It was closer to the surface. It could be pressed down. It controlled the odor, and was a breakthrough, but in slurry handling. But it took about 20 years for it to come onto the market in the UK, a little bit quicker in North America. But sometimes people just forget about it, and the manufacturers don't push it.
And I think, money talks for a lot of people, and a lot of people still view animal manures as a waste rather than a resource. And I think if we get environmental permitting for intensive livestock, i.e. dairy units, we will then start to see, there's funding available now in Farm Equipment and Technology Fund grants for, injection equipment and so on and so forth. But, my view is the tech is there. It's the will to do it and the drive to do it, which is the challenge.
Exactly. No question.
Many years ago, I remember seeing a Professor Godwin stand up and hold a spade in his hand and say, never mind the fact that this conference is titled Precision Farming, go and dig a hole. And that's stuck with me ever since, because I think we are guilty, both as ag engineers and in the world of farming, of getting excited about shiny things rather than dealing with the principles and working back from the principles.
Exactly. Those principles are still there from the 18th century, where people did do things like take spades to the ground at that time, and they still do it. We haven't yet invented the digital spade. We've been trying, but we ain't got there yet.
No, it still needs a driver. I've often thought that one of the worst inventions, as well as the best inventions, is a tractor, for the simple reason that it allows us to apply rather too much power in conditions when we shouldn't be applying any power to the land. And a selection of the fundamental challenges we face with yield plateaus, soil structure, and so on and so forth, are all to do with doing the wrong thing at the wrong time with the wrong implement.
We couldn't agree with you more.
So we've got a PhD. We've got back to the UK. You have done a bit of work with McGill in Canada. So you're on the road to publish and not die at this point. Tell us a bit more then. We've sort of got, I'm guessing by now, into the mid to late 70s. Have we something like that? Where were you? Where are we at now?
Yeah, well, that's about right. The PhD took me through to 74. From 74 to 77, I worked on the project based on the Strutt report of modern farming and the soil. And as a result of that, I guess I hadn't made created too many problems at Silso. And Brian May was head of school at the time. And he said, Dick, come on board, join the academic staff, which was just at the right time. I was beginning, when you get towards your late 20s, you'd like a little bit of stability in your life. And I'd run on 2-year contract in Illinois, a 3-year contract for a PhD, a 3-year contract as a research officer. And that was fine. I don't regret any one of those. But by the time you get towards your late 20s, early 30s, you need just to begin to see something a little bit more stable. I think one message here that's very useful, I guess, as having finished my PhD, or having finished a PhD, one route would have been to go straight into lecturing. What I found afterwards, that I think I had a better route in through not going into lecturing straight away, but by having 3 years as a postdoc. That postdoc experience enabled you to seal your career, to get the papers out, to do everything, to do good research, which if you go into lecturing, the first 2 or 3 years of your life are driven towards producing the lecturing material.
Yes.
Which is you're probably at the most creative period in your life intellectually in order to make other things happen. And so I would recommend to people, do take that route, although it may be somewhat a little more risky and less stable, but it does pay dividends.
And as you say, by the time you found yourself with some tenured teaching position, you'd actually got your bedrock of experience behind you. So by the time you're standing up in a lecture theatre and people are saying, well, why the hell should we listen to Professor Godwin? Actually, you can say, well, I've done this and I've done that and I found out this, rather than just recycling your predecessor's notes.
It's absolutely right. I mean,
so you've got standing.
You do need your predecessor's notes as well.
Well. Yes, absolutely.
But it does give you a little bit more stature, I guess, and I can't think of quite the right word.
Credibility.
That's the exact right word. The credibility amongst again people that aren't much younger than yourself at the time.
Yeah, ultimately, particularly when you're in the postgrad world, you're functioning amongst people who are, if not your peers, will be becoming your peers because of the level you're working at. So the kind of idea of authority is rooted in knowledge rather than seniority.
Yes, exactly.
So tell us a bit more about the work you did, on your research side of things from 77 onwards.
Well, basically from 77 onwards, the research I did then was to predominantly for the first 2 or 3 years would have been tillage engineering driven. In addition to a couple of major awards that we received from the Agricultural and Research Council for work from the subsoiling work we'd done earlier through into mold drainage and other land drainage applications that Gordon and I working together there. I worked on research projects for a number of the tillage companies like Ransom, Sims and Jeffries and Twos and Parmiter and a couple of others, where we were looking at improvement to their tines. The McConnell Shakerator in particular was one that we did quite a lot of work trying to improve on the design of the tines that had been originally designed in Australia. We failed. It was such a bloody good tine in the first place. There wasn't much you could do to improve it, but it was a good experience and began to build one standing within the industrial community. We were very fortunate that many people throughout the industry would come to us with their issues, whether that be for a short-term research project directly or to sponsor master students or sponsor PhD students.
So you sort of progressed through the academic ranks. Where did this lead you to with Silso, which became Cranfield then?
Yeah, Silso became Cranfield in 75. And I recognise that as being a great opportunity because of my background and the requirements that Cranfield had in terms of academic stature. And so as a result of that, I moved, fortunately, pretty quickly through the ranks from a lecturer to professor. And I guess it was probably in the middle 80s I was a professor, one of the youngest professors in Cranfield as a whole. As a result of the work I'd done, I can always remember the professorial interview I had, where they questioned me on obviously the work I'd done, but one of the least pieces of work I had worked on was vibrating tillage. But everybody was excited about vibrating tillage, and so I got hammered on the topic of vibrating tillage. But thankfully, the bit that I had done was enough to be able to be obviously convincing that I knew something about what I was talking about.
So the great fear of a panel interview is you've got 3 or 4 minds on the other side of the table, and you've got no idea which direction they're going to go off in.
Exactly. And so I was fortunate. I went through the academic rank, and as I was doing that, they said, "Oh, you can do that. If you're a quite busy, Dick, but you've got a bit of spare time. You can. Would you like to be a department head? Would you like to be the dean? Would you like to be the pro vice chancellor of Cranfield?" So these were all additional duties on top of your day job, effectively.
You want something doing, go to a busy man or woman, in my experience.
I think that does bear that out.
So you finally retired from Cranfield, and then where did that lead you?
Well, Wyn Jones and you know Wyn pretty well, I'm sure, from your Harper days.
Yeah.
Um, Wyn had been talking to me and saying, "When you retire, Dick, would you like to come up here?" And I think that's not a bad idea, as long as it's not too much. And 2 or 3 days before I actually retired, Jim Loynes and Andy Cobb came and saw me at Silso and said, "We hear you're retiring at the end of the week, Dick." "Oh, no, you're not. You're going to come and work for us for a day or two a week. We're just going to try to seal the deal for Wyn." And I said, "All right, let's settle on a day and a half a week." And so so I did that. That because there wasn't that much more time in my life at that moment, because I still had 9 PhDs to supervise from Cranfield after I retired. So 9 PhDs at three graduating a year for the next 3 years.
I was going to say, presumably they were the "I've started, so I will finish" batch of your retirement line.
Exactly, and I wasn't going to let them swim on their own.
Mm.
I had agreed that I would supervise them, and I supervised them to the end. And in fact, that was some of that last batch of PhDs of mine were probably the most exciting time in my life, in academic life, in terms of not having too much other responsibilities, and I could get on working with them.
Yeah, really focus on them.
And it was very good, and they've all turned up to be heroes in their field.
So tell us a little bit more about your post-retirement life with Harper. What did you get involved with in engineering at Harper?
What I was doing there was they felt they needed to strengthen their ag engineering research at Harper. Hitherto, they've been pretty much focused on teaching related work and doing a damn good job for the industry in so doing. But there were much pressures within the university world to jack up the research base of these institutions. And so they said, "Can we help with that? Can you help inject some more work in soil and water management?" And as you know, the Soil and Water Management Centre established to do that. There was feedback from the industry that at that time the mechatronics teaching at Harper needed to be strengthened. And so whilst I wasn't teaching mechatronics for them, the path was to try to find out exactly what was needed and to try to find funding in order that new staff could be brought in. And thankfully at that time, CLAS came along and said, what we would do is we'll give Harper 2 half appointments, which was quite smart, because that ensured that Harper had to find 2 half appointments
to
match. And so that jacked up the mechatronics side of the work, which led then to Simon Blackburn and others coming in, and in longer term hands-free hectare. The other activity I was quite proud of was I think it was Yanto Guy's PhD, and I was a bit concerned about the fact that he didn't have the best facilities in order to do some of the work where he was stripping down tractors and putting sensors within the transmission systems. And I think you do need some proper clean laboratories. You're going into precision farming, we need those. And there was an action between the then chairman of the governors and myself. And Alison Blackburn was chairman, and she was a bit concerned about the facilities. And we got together and she said, "Let's have a pincer action. You push from below and I'll push from on top." And within about 18 months, we'd got the plans and the planning permission in order to build what is now known as the Agricultural Engineering Innovation Centre, which consisted of good clean laboratories, extra staff offices, a couple of teaching rooms, a boardroom. And I went off to the States one summer, and when I came back, David Llewellyn, who would become principal at that time, he'd stuck into it a nice lecture theatre as well. I wasn't anxious about the lecture theatres because there were other lecture theatres on campus, but obviously from his perspective, he knew that they were down a lecture theatre as well, and because the Douglas Bomford Trust was a funder of the centre, it put in £100,000 or £2,000. That was enough that if when David went to someone else, said, "I've got a couple of 100,000 from this. What can you add something to the pot?" Yeah. And this snowball effect worked quite well. And within about a year, David, plus taking out a loan, had got enough funding in order to build the new building, which really jacked up the whole presence of ag engineering on the Harper campus. And because the Bomford Trust put that initial seed corn in, as it were, that new lecture theatre was referred to as the Douglas Bomford Lecture Theatre. And we had an opening session there, and that worked very well. And I brought in with others and quite a few speakers from around the world, former students from Harper, former students from Silso that had worked with us, and Mark Moore, who you will know very well indeed, the current president. He'd been doing his PhD with Simon Blackmore and I at Silso, and was obviously interested in what was happening at Harper. And I got him to speak, and he was saying, "I've got the best job in the world. I'm an agricultural engineer." And almost all of the other speakers afterwards echoed that, but also challenged him by saying, "We've got the best job in the world," whether they were working in Greece or Australia or China. And so Mark put a nice impact into it.
No, I remember that conference, and I remember that it was a great day, a great opening. So bear in mind that you've just expounded at great length about the phase one of your retirement, Dick. I'm not sure whether I should even ask this next question, but what about agricultural engineering now in your life as somebody who's been retired for quite some time?
Well, when I landed at Harper Adams, and so with this, will you help expand the engineering research there? It was a question of finding people with an interest and the time to do research that correlated with my own interests, and people like David White and Paula Misselvich said, we're very keen to work with you, Dick. And they've been brilliant colleagues since then. And so we decided that there ought to be a project which carried on from some of the work that Tim Chaman had been doing on controlled traffic, but it needed to be broader than that. And so we set up a major experiment we thought might last for 3 or 4 years, because we managed to find a PhD studentship in order to do it. We are now in the 5th student in succession in the chain. And so that looks at the whole effects of tillage and traffic on soil conditions, yield responses, carbon sequestration, greenhouse gas emissions. And so that project has evolved with time over the last 15
and is that
years.
15 years? Yeah, 15 years.
15 years. Now, since we started off, because we didn't have a student immediately, we needed to get the site established and the designs done, and that was around 2010, 2011. And we've had some very, very good students on that, and a lot of people interested in the results, because it's probably the only long-term tillage experiment in the country, if not sometimes in the world, where we're looking at that interaction between tillage systems and traffic management systems. So that keeps me employed for a little while every week, worrying about that. There's obviously work comes from that needs to be published. and I seem to be the one that's got the time to read the papers once it's in draft form, if not writing them from scratch, and so try to help get those out. I review some papers for academic journals like biosystems engineering. Well, this morning I was talking with the National Association of Agricultural Contractors, because next week we're doing the one-day short course on land drainage design. I spoke with the farmers group a couple of weeks ago up in York, and I'm waiting for somebody to come through with some money to send me back to Tasmania in April. Fingers crossed for that.
It's presumably the right time of year to go to Tasmania for the weather as well, I'm hoping.
Yeah, I hope so.
Absolutely.
But they're 6 months out of phase with us. But those are the sorts of things I do, which probably keep me going 2 or 3 days a week. There's always something to think about, always a little bit to do without it killing you.
No, well, that's the main thing. Keep putting one foot in front of the other, I think, as one old farmer once said to me. So thinking about, ag engineering, which has been writ large throughout your life, what role does volunteering play in your life, Dick? Or what role has it played?
It's a question of how you define volunteering, isn't it? But I guess it's the unpaid job, and certainly as I retired, one of the then Vice Chancellor of Cranfield said, "Dick, there's no shortage of volunteering jobs," and how right he was.
Yeah.
But to go backwards into my earlier career, I guess the Institution of Agricultural Engineers is in this scheme of things has played a major role. And what you do for the institution is volunteering, but it brings back so many other things. You put something in and you get a hell of a lot out, because it brings together like people and enables you to continue to keep your brain going and alive to other reaches within the profession. And I feel sorry now that not enough young to mid-career people are engaging with it. Some do, and some get a lot from it. Others could get a lot more from it if only they had the support from maybe their bosses to say, go and do that. But the almighty dollar and pound sometimes has to drive their life. So I served for a while on a number of committees for the institution, and still sit on the publication management committee for Landwards and biosystems engineering. The other major institution like that in my life has been the American Society of Agricultural Engineers, or Agricultural and Biosystems Engineering, as they call themselves now. I joined when I was a graduate student in Illinois. I immediately belonged to the soil plant machine dynamics group, the future strategy group. I was international director for the ASAE in the early 90s, which was an interesting role because I was able to represent all of the ASAE members who weren't American domiciled, and try to make sure that they weren't forgotten about within the society. As a result of that, I made a lot more international friends, which was brilliant, because that was very valuable to my day job, as it were, because Silse was very dependent upon international students, and so it was a good way of some gentle recruitment,
Yes,
and making sure that you were known as to who you were internationally. Similar to that, the Bomford Trust, again, the Bomford Trust has that interest in trying to support teaching, education, and short course development training in ag engineering. And John Fox had invited me to be a member of that in the early 90s. And then later on, I took on the role of chairman of the Bomford Trust, which was a great honour. And you could help put money where it would do some good in terms of bringing on embryonic ideas. What else did I do?
Well, I'm still a bit sort of overwhelmed by all this, to be honest, Dick. You've been busy. You've been equally busy outside of the day job. Let's put it that way. It's probably worth mentioning, and you might not like to blow your own trumpet, but I've got a long list of awards which you've received. So I'm just going to rattle through them to spare your blushes. But you have an honorary fellowship and an award of merit from the Institution of Agricultural Engineers. You are a fellow of the American Society of Agricultural and Biosystems Engineers, and you have the ASABE President's Award for International Activities. You also have the ASABE John Deere Gold Medal for Distinguished Achievement in the Application of Science and Art to the Soil, the Eurag Eng Award of Merit for Scientific Understanding, and the Times Higher Education Award for the Outstanding Research Supervisor of the Year 2021. I'm just looking, well, because we're recording this on Zoom, believe it or not, just looking to see if your bookcase is groaning behind you with the amount of gold and gongs and porcelain and silverware which is sitting there, Dick. But you've certainly covered some ground. Let's put it that way.
I've been fortunate.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed doing all of it. I don't think there's been a bad day, really. I mean, there have been bad days, but it's got nothing to do with this.
And also, with respect, you have made the most of the opportunities which have been presented to you as well.
Thank you.
So,
I have tried to do that both in work and out of work.
Look, and inspiration, and luck has a part to do with it, but making the most of the opportunities and the perspiration behind that. What's the phrase about innovation? 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. You've put your back into it as well, Dick. Just let's move on a little bit as well. Given your career and the ground you have covered, which is a lot, and you've done a lot of things and are still doing. Just think now, on reflection, what was the best piece of advice you were ever given, or you would give now?
I think the advice I would give now is that agricultural engineering is a very critical discipline to help feed the world and to manage the environment. In so doing, it throws up fascinating challenges all around the world. There's plenty of opportunity there. So my advice to young men and young women who are thinking about this, and I know your daughter's studying ag engineering at the moment.
She is.
Is to give yourself the best education and training available, and then go out and have an enjoyable career. There's plenty to do, and it's generally all rewarding.
No, I would echo that entirely. Thinking about the wider world of agricultural engineering. So as you sit at your desk or you're watching the news or reading the paper, what do you think are the key issues facing ag engineering as a discipline today? What are the big challenges?
I think they fall into two areas. One is very much an environmental issue of managing water. We've either got too much, we've often seen a lot of drainage and a lot of other problems domestically, but that happens around the world, or we've got too little. And that's the issues to do with water conservation, storage, and irrigation systems. So those are overarching things. Whatever the agriculture is, whatever the crop might be, each of those has a major effect. So issues relating to soil and water are vital in looking after our future. I think there are issues to do with pollution of nitrates and phosphoruses in water. It comes back to the water issue.
Yeah.
We're in an area now of autonomous systems, and they're going to grow. How fast they will grow, I'm not absolutely sure. Depends upon public take up and its attitude towards robotics and things moving around in fields without an operator.
It's cultural rather than technological, in my opinion, with the challenges. It's a societal desire or perception.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things that are happening now with robotics, I remember talking to Al Ryder, who shared an office with me in Illinois all those years ago. He was vice president of New Holland in the States. And they did some of these things back in the 1990s with Carnegie Mellon, but they never put them into operation because they were worried about a big tractor going bonkers and going across an interstate, and all the insurance and liabilities and everything else that were associated with that. So it is a question of society. There is a question of making sure that the things are technically correct. There's a big need to reduce energy requirements. We have reduced a lot of energy requirements in agriculture. The move from deeper tillage to shallower tillage and no-till is a help there. But there needs to be others, and there needs to be more work done on alternative fuels. And I think just from the things that we've been doing, looking what happens at Harper, linking together the benefits of the autonomous equipment, the hand-free hectare project, with the benefits of controlled traffic. The two are two bedfellows that just have to sit together. But we need to make more work to ensure that happens.
No, that's fantastic. Sort of just wrapping up now, what advice would you offer to someone thinking about or considering or even heading into a career in agricultural engineering?
I guess the first thing I would say is go and have a look at the iAgri website. See what is being put out there. Are there any more podcasts like this that may be available? And ask the office in the iAgri for some back copies of Landwards, just to thumb through and see what people do in this business. Talk to as many ag engineers as you possibly can. Study the university and college prospectuses. It gives you a good insight as to what's going on, what the training will be. Attend university college open days. Make an application. Go for an interview. It might put you off, but you need to go and talk and find out exactly what's going on. Hopefully it won't put you off. And you'll say, yeah, I want to make certain applications to study here. And talk to potential employers. See what they say about it. It's several different potential employers that steered my route through in those early days. And so getting some feedback there can't be a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd echo that entirely. Well, look, I'm really grateful for your time today, Dick. This has been fascinating. I think we could keep on talking for a long time, but I think at sort of 53 minutes or so far, I think it's probably a good time to draw the line. So we have been joined today by Professor Dick Godwin. Dick, thank you so much for your time today.
It's been a great pleasure. I've enjoyed doing it. And it's a time to reflect back on the things you've done. Sometimes you've forgotten about them, but it was nice to be refreshed. And thank you for the opportunity, Andy.
No, it was fascinating, Dick. So thank you, Dick. And thank you to everyone who's listening today. And I will say goodbye today. You've been listening to Landwards, the podcast of the Institution of Agricultural Engineers. Goodbye.
You have been listening to Landwards, the podcast for the land-based engineering community, brought to you by the Institution of Agricultural Engineers.